The first man to walk in space was not on the moon. He was not standing on another world. He was floating outside a small Soviet spacecraft, high above Earth, with no ground beneath him, no rescue vehicle beside him, and only a thin tether connecting his body to the machine that was keeping him alive. His name was Alexei Leonov. On March 18, 1965, he left the Voskhod 2 spacecraft through an inflatable airlock and became the first human being to move outside a spacecraft in orbit. For the Soviet Union, it was supposed to be a perfect victory. For the world, it looked like the future had arrived. But Leonov was not walking in the way people walk on Earth. He was drifting in open space, locked inside a pressurized suit, staring down at the planet from the outside of his ship. And then the suit began to betray him. It expanded in the vacuum. His arms became harder to bend. His legs felt trapped. Sweat filled the inside of his helmet, and when he tried to return to the airlock, he realized something horrifying. The first man to walk in space might not be able to get back inside. Before astronauts walked on the moon, before spacewalks became familiar images from the International Space Station, and before anyone really understood how dangerous working outside a spacecraft could be, the Soviet Union prepared a mission that was as bold as it was fragile. Voskhod 2 was not a large ship. It was not built like the spacious spacecraft people imagine today. It was cramped, risky, and designed during the most ruthless years of the space race, when being first often mattered more than being safe. The Americans were preparing their own spacewalks, and Moscow wanted another victory before they could get there. They had already shocked the world with Sputnik. They had sent Yuri Gagarin into orbit. Now they wanted to prove that a human could leave a spacecraft completely and survive in open space. The man chosen for that moment was Alexei Leonov, a Soviet Air Force pilot, artist, and cosmonaut, with the calm face of someone who understood danger but did not show it. Beside him was Commander Pavel Belyaev, who would remain inside the capsule and control the mission while Leonov went outside. But outside did not mean a surface. It did not mean the moon. It meant something far stranger. Leonov would leave Voskhod 2 while it was orbiting Earth, hundreds of kilometers above the planet, and float beside the spacecraft in the vacuum. To make that possible, engineers added an inflatable airlock called Volga to the side of the capsule. It was a temporary tunnel into space. Leonov would crawl inside it, close the hatch behind him, depressurize the chamber, open the outer hatch, and move out into orbit. Every part of that plan depended on systems that had never protected a human being in this exact situation before. The airlock had to hold, the suit had to bend, the tether had to stay attached, the hatch had to close again. And once Leonov left the cabin, Belyaev could watch him, speak to him, and monitor him. But he could not simply reach out and pull him home. When Leonov moved into the Volga airlock, the mission crossed a line no human had ever crossed before. Inside the capsule, Belyaev remained in the small pressurized cabin. Outside the inner hatch, Leonov was alone in a narrow chamber attached to the spacecraft like a fragile sleeve. Then the pressure dropped, the outer hatch opened, and for the first time in history, a human being moved out of a spacecraft and into open space. He was not walking with his feet. He was floating. The word spacewalk makes it sound controlled, almost graceful. But what Leonov experienced was more like drifting beside a machine at orbital speed while Earth curved beneath him. The planet was bright and enormous. The sky was black. There was no wind, no sound, no up or down in the normal sense. The Voskhod 2 spacecraft, the only safe place in the universe for him, suddenly looked very small. Leonov was connected by a tether, but the tether was not comfort. It was a reminder. One line, one body, one spacecraft, one chance to return. Soviet cameras captured the historic image, and to anyone watching later, it looked like a clean triumph. A man had gone outside the ship. A man had entered the void and survived. But inside the suit, the moment was already changing. The Berkut spacesuit had to stay pressurized to keep Leonov alive. In the vacuum of space, that pressure made the suit expand. It began to balloon around him. His gloves stiffened. His arms became harder to control. His legs would not move the way he expected. Simple actions demanded more effort. He had planned to use equipment and cameras, but even reaching controls became difficult. Then came the heat. Space itself was not heating him, but the suit was becoming a closed, exhausting environment. His body was working harder. Sweat built up. His temperature rose. The first man outside a spacecraft was not peacefully exploring the future. He was fighting a suit that was slowly turning into a prison. After roughly 12 minutes outside Voskhod 2, Leonov had done what the mission required. He had proved that a human could leave a spacecraft in orbit. He had given the Soviet Union another first. The logical next step was simple: return to the airlock, close the hatch, repressurize, and come home as a hero. But space does not care how simple a plan looks on paper. When Leonov tried to get back into the airlock, the swollen suit made his body too rigid. He could not bend properly. He could not fold himself neatly into the narrow opening. The airlock that had allowed him to enter history was now threatening to keep him outside the spacecraft. There was no backup astronaut waiting beside him, no robotic arm, no rescue capsule, no way for Belyaev to open the cabin and drag him in. Leonov was outside the ship, overheating, losing strength, and trying to force a pressurized human-shaped balloon back through a hatch that suddenly seemed too small. And this is where the mission stopped being a milestone and became a survival story. Before the most dangerous part unfolds, subscribe to Orbit Ledger and leave a like if you want more real space stories, where the official triumph hides how close everything came to disaster. Because what Leonov did next was not clean, safe, or approved in the way people imagine space missions are approved. He made a decision that could have injured or killed him. He opened a valve and began lowering the pressure inside his own spacesuit. That made the suit softer. It gave his arms and legs just enough flexibility to move. But lowering pressure inside a suit in space was a serious risk. It increased the danger to his body and pushed him closer to decompression sickness. He was choosing one danger to escape another. Stay outside, and he might never return. Release pressure, and he might damage his own body badly enough that returning would not matter. Leonov chose to survive the next few seconds. He forced himself back into the airlock head first, exhausted and drenched in sweat. But even then, the nightmare was not over. Inside the cramped chamber, he still had to turn around so he could close the outer hatch. He had to rotate his body inside a narrow, inflatable tunnel while wearing the same suit that had almost trapped him outside forever. Somehow, Leonov managed it. He closed the outer hatch, the airlock repressurized, the inner hatch opened, and he returned to the Voskhod 2 cabin alive. To the outside world, this could have been the end of the story. The first spacewalk had succeeded. The Soviet Union had made history. Leonov had floated outside a spacecraft in Earth orbit and returned. But inside the mission, success still felt dangerously incomplete. His body had been pushed hard. His suit had nearly trapped him. His return had required a dangerous improvisation that the public would not fully understand for years. And now he and Belyaev still had to bring the spacecraft back to Earth. That should have been the safer part. It was not. Voskhod 2's automatic re-entry system failed to perform as planned, forcing Belyaev to conduct a manual re-entry. In orbit, small errors become large consequences. A slightly wrong orientation, a delayed burn, or an imperfect maneuver could send a capsule far from its target or expose the crew to a more dangerous return. Belyaev managed the re-entry, but the landing was not where recovery teams expected. Instead of touching down neatly in the planned area, Voskhod 2 landed deep in a remote forest region of the Soviet Union. After surviving open space, after surviving the swollen suit, after surviving the airlock, Leonov and Belyaev returned to Earth and found themselves isolated in snow and wilderness. The spacecraft had brought them home, but not back to comfort. Rescue crews had to find them and reach them. The official story was a historic success, but the real experience was much rougher. A man nearly trapped outside his spacecraft, a commander forced into manual re-entry, and 2 cosmonauts waiting in the frozen forest after one of the most dangerous flights of the early space age. That is why Voskhod 2 should not be remembered only as the mission that gave humanity its first spacewalk. It should be remembered as the mission that revealed how hostile the simplest action becomes beyond Earth. Opening a hatch was dangerous. Moving a hand was difficult. Returning through a doorway became a life-or-death problem. A spacesuit designed to protect a man nearly prevented him from surviving. An airlock designed to make the mission possible nearly became the place where the mission ended. Leonov did not walk on the moon. He did something earlier, stranger, and in some ways more frightening. He left a spacecraft in Earth orbit when no one fully knew what would happen to the suit, the body, the airlock, or the mission systems once a human being was truly outside. And for a few minutes in March 1965, the entire future of space exploration passed through one narrow hatch. If Leonov failed to return, the first spacewalk would not be remembered as a triumph. It would be remembered as the moment humanity learned that leaving a spacecraft was easier than coming back. But he did return, not because the mission was perfect, not because the systems worked exactly as planned. He returned because, under pressure, overheating, and trapped in a suit that had become too stiff to save him, he made the one decision that gave him a chance. The image looks beautiful now, a white figure floating beside a spacecraft above Earth. But behind that image is a much darker truth. The first man to walk in space was also the first man to discover that in orbit, even your own suit can become your enemy.